A warm and hearty welcome to this edition of the Nation Leadership Forum. As always, it's a platform that creates an interface between the public sector, private sector, and the public to delve into issues affecting the economy and to see how we can advance the agenda of growth and development forward. Tonight, we are focusing on the energy sector. The energy sector plays a critical role in Kenya's socio-economic development through powering households, businesses, and other establishments. According to official statistics, Kenya's energy sector has 2,336 megawatts in installed capacity, at least 90% of which is drawn from renewable sources. This notwithstanding, the energy sector faces a number of challenges, notably the reliability and quality of supply in the national grid. It is against this backdrop that the National Energy Policy of 2018 came into force, with the main objective being affordable, competitive, and sustainable supply. How can Kenya better position itself as far as the energy sector is concerned? How can the country ensure that the energy needs of industry and households are met? To unpack this and a lot more, I am joined by Dr. Kevin Kanina Kariuki, who serves as the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth at the Africa Development Bank, Madam Phyllis Wakiaga, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and finally FCPA Fernandez Barasa, the Managing Director at the Kenya Transmission Company, KETRACO. Lady and gentlemen, welcome on set. And if I could start with Phyllis, I've spoken to a number of stakeholders in Kenya's energy sector. The indication is that in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been depressed demand. You sit on the demand side. Just give us a sense of how it's looking like. Phyllis, I think your microphone is on mute. If you could just unmute it, please.
Thank you very much for that.
Great.
Yes, I'm saying that the COVID-19 situation has affected demand, and we have seen suppressed demand within the manufacturing sector. This has mainly been because of the cash flow constraints. As you can imagine, a lot of people are not able to earn the revenue that they normally earn, and this has led to that suppressing demand. And of course, because of that, that has had an impact on the energy utilization, as you mentioned, and it is something that has been happening since March. We saw demand start to pick up about a month or two ago, and depending on how the COVID situation plays out, we are watching to see how that will grow in the next coming months.
Fernandez, just crossing over to you, you are now on the supply side. Just give us a sense of how COVID has affected your dynamics as far as KETRACO is concerned.
So I want to confirm that this COVID crisis is quite unprecedented. With regard to transmission, we have a number of projects which have been affected. Number one, we had to issue a force majeure event because we could not sustain our social distancing. So we had to release some of our contractors to be away for 90 days. One of the other issues which has affected our construction works, of course, most of the staff are working below capacity. We take pride with regard to the safety of our staff. So we had to release most of our staff. Issues around demand, just to highlight, of course, demand for power has dramatically reduced by almost 15%. And this has affected the revenues by Kenya Power, which clearly affects the entire supply chain. So one thing I can say is this COVID crisis is really affecting the energy sector. But what you're trying to do, of course, is to cope with the crisis by being innovative enough and also being agile so that we can sustain the demand and supply of power. One thing that we take pride in KETRACO is to make sure that the power that we are supplying is reliable, stable, and efficient.
Many thanks for that. And crossing over to Dr. Kariuki, of course, from the African Development Bank, which is a financing entity. Just to get your introductory thoughts, because clearly COVID-19 has thrown a wild card, not just on the demand side, but also the supply side. How are you feeling it from your perspective?
Yeah, from the bank side, what we have seen is that a lot of the customers, be it governments and utilities, have been grossly affected. As Phyllis mentioned, there has been reduction in the demand, and this has affected some of the companies. In actual fact, all the companies. What we have seen is that we've seen demand going down by 10–15% to most of the customers. But in some cases, some have gone down as far as 25%, like in South Africa. So what this means is that the financial wherewithal of these entities are actually compromised, and therefore some of them have reached out to us to see how we can be able to support them to ride through this situation.
Great. And coming back to Phyllis, and Phyllis, just to take you back to a conversation we had not too far back when we were in this budget issues, the issue of the withdrawal of the electricity rebates is something which I speak to a number of manufacturers, and they do indicate has had a bit of an adverse impact. What can you say about this thus far, because now we are 2 months into the financial year?
Thank you very much. I think you're making reference to the withdrawal of the energy rebate, the 30% out of the finance bill. This was implemented from almost the third quarter of last year when it was finally gazetted. We had been working quite closely with the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Industry, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and other partners within the energy sector to come up with a rebate. What the rebate was supposed to do was to try and cushion the sector without necessarily affecting the revenues to the power utilities. And that's why we came up with a formula that gave a rebate based on production and growth in companies. However, within the finance bill this year, barely before we could utilize it, the rebate was withdrawn. So we have written a memorandum appealing for this to be relooked at. We've also had other incentives like the time of use tariff, where we have manufacturers benefit from the tariff when they utilize power in the evenings. I think you know that the energy grid has over about 2,500 megawatts of power. However, during low peak, it even dropped to about 1,300 megawatts in terms of usage. So the time of use tariff was supposed to incentivize use of power at night, and we have seen some industries utilize and benefit from it. However, the challenge is it did have some conditionalities around increased growth in utilization of energy. So we're also having conversation to relook at that because these are some of the incentives that have been put in place to incentivize industry to grow. So the rebate is something that we would like to put back on the table, but holistically, even if it's not a rebate, something that allows us to produce more competitively locally as manufacturers.
Clearly, Phyllis, you seem to be making some good headway there. Let me cross over to Fernandez. Fernandez, when you talk about sustainable energy, one of the key pillars in the policy of the country is sustainable and reliable supply. And the last you and I spoke, there was the conversation around evacuation of power to the western side of this country. How far are we with this?
Thank you, Julian. In terms of evacuation of power to the western region, we are having this Olkara-Lesos-Kisumu transmission line. This is a 400 kV transmission line that we are constructing all the way from Olkaria up to Kisumu. This line is traversing 5 counties. We have Nakuru, we have Kericho, Uasin Gishu, Nandi, and Kisumu. The project is meant to evacuate power from geothermal fields in Olkaria. And at the moment, we are doing 76%. It is an 18.2 billion project funded by JICA. As we speak right now, this project is so significant because all the efforts in Ketraco are geared towards achieving the target completion dates of 31st of January next year. When you look at the macro benefits for this project, we expect the power to power the Kisumu ports because it's one of the strategic investments. Of course, we expect geothermal power for the first time to reach western region, which is renewable energy. And one thing that is very important in terms of regional integration, we expect this power to promote cohesiveness within Kenya and its regional partners. But more importantly, when we terminate in Kisumu, we have programs of ensuring that we have a transmission line coming from Kakamega, of course, Kisumu, Kakamega, and Musaga. So we appreciate the fact that stability of power in western region is one thing. So this transmission line is going to facilitate power stability in the western region, and more importantly in Kakamega, where we are going to have another transmission line starting from Kisumu to Kakamega and Musaga. So one of the things, of course, we expect is employment opportunities will be improved in terms of the facilities available at the ports. This power is also going to promote Kakamega to be an investment hub in western region. So there are many benefits around these Olkara-Lesos-Kisumu, and we are doing everything, all the efforts we are now focusing to make sure that this transmission line is done by January 2021. Thank you.
Great. And coming to Dr. Kariuki, when we talk about financing, many Kenyans perhaps might not be very familiar with the Africa Development Bank. Speak one to the agenda and, of course, to the issue of the renewable energy in your financing portfolio. How significant is it?
Okay. I think...
Go ahead, Dr.
Can't hear you. I didn't hear him.
Okay, I'll take that question again, Dr. Kariuki, a little later. But let me just go back to Fernandez. Dr. I'm telling you can hear me now. I was asking the role of the bank. Many Kenyans might not be familiar with it. Just speak to that. And then also critically, financing renewable energy in your portfolio as Africa Development Bank. How significant is that? Okay,
thank you very much. Today you can't talk about power production without talking about renewable energy. What you find is that there is a trend towards moving to renewable energy, because one of the bank's mandates is to progress on climate resilient trajectory, which means that we need to reduce the amount of emissions. So today, as we speak, in our investments, the total proportion of renewable energy in the bank's portfolio is actually 35%. And over the last 5 years alone, we are developing about 2,800 megawatts, of which about 2,000 or 71% will be renewable energy. So that shows that we are very keen on moving towards renewable energy with a view to supporting the climate change agenda.
Great. And Phyllis, when we talk to many industries or manufacturers, I should say for that matter, when we talk about uptake of these green solutions, they will mention the upfront cost is quite significant. How much of a detractor is this from your view?
Thank you very much. As CAM, we continue to be at the center of driving industrialization and sustainable growth of industry. So we have driven the agenda around the circular economy and also preservation of the economy. Over the years, we've been working with industry around energy efficiency and the move to renewable energy. And it makes financial sense for businesses to embrace energy efficiency and renewable energy. We've carried out energy audits. I think over 80 or even 90% of the audits carried out within the country have been done by CAM through partnerships with development partners like AFD. We've worked with Danida, we have worked with DFID and others. And through this work, what we've been able to do is really to bring to the fore for industry the need to move towards a circular economy. And through the work, we have also been able to work on financing and affordable credit in partnership with AFD and local partner banks in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And this has seen a number of industries, about 40 of them, invest in renewable energy, invest in energy efficiency equipment. And the story at the end of the day has been positive, that all these moves have made for better business to the economy, better business to the environment. And because of that, we've set up the Center for Energy Efficiency and Conservation, which was initially set up by the Ministry of Energy at Kenya Association of Manufacturers in the year 2006. And we are now expanding that initiative. And we have now put in place a Center for Green Growth and Climate Change. And industries are embracing a lot of what is happening globally because they are seeing that it is leading to competitiveness at farm level, and they are able to then produce their products more competitively, even as we continue to address the external competitiveness issues within the business environment.
Great points you're raising there, Phyllis. And coming to Fernandez, one of the issues which was highlighted in the National Energy Policy of 2018 is that Kenya's transmission network, especially at peak demand, is a bit constrained. Just give us a sense of how this looks like and what progress is being made in light of this.
First and foremost, I want to confirm that when you look at the demand we have at the moment, we can call it suppressed demand because so far we are talking about 1,800 megawatts of demand. against installed capacity of almost 2,800. Now, why is it suppressed demand? One of the reasons which I alluded earlier is because we don't have sufficient investments in transmission network. For example, what is being generated in geothermal power, that is in Olkaria, we are doing almost 800 megawatts, and whatever is being supplied in Nairobi is around 400 megawatts or 500 thereabouts. So we don't have geothermal power being evacuated to the western region. So that addresses an issue of suppressed demand. Now, what KETRACO is doing is to ensure that we accelerate investment in transmission lines, which will facilitate evacuation of power. For example, the line which we completed 2 years ago, that is the Loengalani-Suswa line, it's evacuating the capacity of wind power from all the way from Loengalani to Suswa. So that is addressing demand. Other opportunities of addressing demand, for example, is investments in things like electrification of the SGR. That is one item that will address almost 150 to 200 megawatts of power. So when we have some of those high intensity investments, we are going to attract a lot of investment opportunities. We are going to have special economic zones, of course, along Mombasa, Nairobi, which will, of course, increase the demand and consumption of power. So one thing that KETRACO is doing, which is very strategic, is to have investment in high voltage transmission lines, starting from 132 kilovolts up to 500. And once we have stable power, definitely we are going to attract investments in industries. We are going to support the Big Four agenda of manufacturing, affordable healthcare, is around food security. And this will definitely have a direct impact on attracting demand. So what we are talking about here in terms of economics is the supply of electricity will attract a demand. So the suppressed demands of 1,800 megawatts will be improved when we have accelerated investment in transmission lines, which will secure stable, reliable, and sufficient power. Thank you.
All right, and coming to Dr. Kariuki, and to the point that I mentioned to Phyllis Wakiaga earlier, is that many entities out here will tell you that when it comes to renewable energy, the upfront cost of investment is a bit too high. What is the AFDB doing around de-risking this kind of investments?
Okay, thank you very much. The bank is involved in a number of levels. The first level is the policy dialogue, because one of the things that is a fact of life is that there are certain policy interventions that are required in order to make the investment environment competitive. First of all, we engage with policy dialogue with respect to tariffs. We work with countries in preparing what they call country strategic papers. But all these are essentially aimed at ensuring that we create competitive environments in those countries. Additionally, we provide affordable and competitively priced financing for a lot of these projects. So, for example, in addition to that, we provide very long-term financing for these projects. We'll finance projects upwards of up to about 18 to 20 years on the private sector front, but also finance projects of up to 30 or more years on the public sector. So at the end of the day, you find that the funding that we bring to these projects is truly competitive and therefore is able to reduce the cost of the tariff that results. Having said that, the one thing that is a fact is that you find that in a lot of cases, the tax component is also significant. And sometimes you argue, okay, the tax goes to the government, and therefore if the tax was reduced, then the tariffs could be slightly more competitive. But these are things that we try to engage governments with at a policy dialogue through the regulator, regulatory reforms, policy reforms. We have facilities that, such as the Africa legal facility that is able to assist companies to, or countries to structure projects that at the end of the day will result in competitive tariffs. So our interventions are twofold. First of all, at the policy level, and secondly, in providing various instruments that are able to reduce the cost of financing. And this is long-term financing, but also we provide various forms of guarantees that enable or enhance the credit worthiness of the entities that we finance.
Right, many thanks, Dr. Kariuki. And that point by Daktari takes us to a short break. Remember, we are focusing on sustainable energy, and you can be part of this conversation by tweeting at NTV Kenya, at AmbokoJH. The hashtag is NMG Leadership Forum. We'll be right back after this short break. And a warm and hearty welcome back to this conversation on the Nation Leadership Forum. Tonight we are focusing on the subject of sustainable energy in line with the National Energy Policy of October 2018, which came after review of the one for 2004, clearly trying to iron out some kinks which were there in the energy sector and to see how the business environment can be made rather more competitive. Before the break, we were addressing a number of issues, including tariffs. And I want just to hear from Phyllis, the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Phyllis, the issue of tariffs was brought up, and I'm keen to know just how expensive is energy in Kenya from your perspective?
Thanks for that. Energy is one of the key sources of production within the manufacturing sector. And when we look at energy as an association, we look at it broadly. We look at the cost of the power. We look at the reliability and quality of the power. So that's the more holistic approach. In terms of the cost of power, it would be to look at the cost of power in comparison with other economies that we compete with. Because remember, we are competing in a global environment, and competitiveness is pegged on a number of things. As the Association of Manufacturers, we have looked at competitiveness across board. In terms of the inbound competitiveness, how affordably our goods get to the factory, all the way from the IDF, RDL, port charges and everything. Then in the middle, we've looked at our production costs, and the cost of power, the cost of labor and all that fall in that middle bucket. And then we've looked at the outbound costs. So cost of power is critical. In Kenya, we are currently averaging at about maybe 16 US cents per kilowatt hour. This has been one of the challenges, especially for very high energy intensive sectors. And that's why different incentives have been put in place, like the time of use tariff, the SEZ tariffs in places like Naivasha, and the power rebate that was withdrawn. So it's an area that we want to encourage government to continue looking at and have a long-term view so that we are able to plan as industries, knowing what the way forward will be in terms of the cost of power, so that we have the policy stability. For example, the issue of the rebate, when we have it put in and withdrawn the following year, it really does lead to that lack of policy stability. But we do need to address the cost of power, and the best way to address it is by driving up demand. I think Ketrako spoke about that the demand is almost at about 1,000 to 1,700, but we still have to pay for over almost 2,800 megawatts of power. So the only way is to drive up demand, bring in high energy consuming sectors, bring in textile, integrated mills, bring in steel plants. And if we're able to grow our markets significantly, both local, regionally, and internationally, we'll be able then to produce power at a more competitive price that industries can then grow much faster at. Thanks.
Fernandez, to come to you, and Phyllis has raised something very important in terms of affordability of energy. It's not only about the tariffs, it's also about the reliability. And when we talk to Ketrako, one of the issues which normally sticks out is the challenge of system losses. How significant is this as a challenge, Mr. Fernandez?
Thank you very much, Julian. In terms of losses, there are three categories of losses. The first one is transmission losses, which accounts for 3.5%. Then we have distribution and commercial losses, which are basically almost around 20%. So what we are doing in Ketrako, for example, is to address the transmission losses by investing in more high voltage transmission lines. The more the voltage, the lesser the transmission losses. For example, we are having projects which are basically meant to reduce the transmission losses by investing in 400 kV projects. When you look at some of the ongoing projects, for example, Olkara Lesos Kisumu is a 400 kV project. We're also doing a 500 HVDC project that is Ethiopia, Kenya. It's basically meant to evacuate power. But more importantly, our counterparts in Kenya Power, I know there's something they're doing around addressing commercial losses and distribution losses, which are basically compiled the many issues which account for commercial losses. For example, vandalism, theft of power. Some of those issues I know my colleague Bernard Ngugi is addressing them, commercial losses. But where we see it as KETRACO, we understand that the higher the voltage of transmission lines, the lesser the transmission losses. So on average, globally, we are talking about 3.5. But at the moment, what is accounting for the transmission losses is now 3%. In the next 2 years, we are actually going to bring on board almost 8,000 kilometers of transmission lines. And this is basically going to address the transmission losses, which ultimately will improve the stability, quality, and reliability of power. When power is stable, when power is sufficient, and when power is reliable, definitely the distribution losses will also be addressed, because Kenya Power now will not have a lot of operational and maintenance activities because we have stability and quality of power. Thank you.
Great. And crossing over to Dr. Kariuki, there is the pervasive view out here that the IPPs, independent power producers, are some of the key drivers of the high tariffs that we are experiencing as an economy. What's your view on this, and perhaps what is AFDB doing around this space?
First of all, I think I would like to disabuse the notion that IPPs are the source of high cost of power. I think we need to take one step back and understand why we need IPPs. Firstly, the infrastructure, in this particular case in power, the power demand that is required is way beyond the financing requirements of the state. So as a result, we need to look to the private sector to contribute towards adding generation capacity. And at the end of the day, what we really are interested in, as in a holistic manner, is that tariffs must be cost reflective. So when a project is brought on stream, you look, an investor will look at the tariff that exists in the country, the financial viability of the utilities in the country. They will look at the policy and regulatory frameworks that exist in our country, and at the end of the day, look at financing that particular project, both from debt and equity. And now, once you have all this coming up together, you have a tariff. And at the end of the day, I think from the bank perspective, we want to be viewed as an honest broker. We have no interest whatsoever to increase the cost of power. So we will advance and bring forth financing that is affordable. We will bring in other instruments such as guarantees and even grants where necessary to try and keep the cost of power down. However, at the end of the day, I think what is critical is to understand that tariffs are generally a function of cost reflectivity. If you are generating using solar, you are generating using thermals, you are generating using hydro, all these will contribute to the cost of production. So once we have cost-reflective tariffs, what it means is that the utility will also be viable. And having a viable utility will ensure that you are able to contract IPPs. And when an IPP is coming into a country, they look at that environment that has been created and form a view as to what tariffs are applicable. And in any case, in a lot of cases, and I think this is very, very important, you have the regulator. I always say that a regulator is surrogate to competition. So the regulator will will inform, will assess the competitiveness of the tariffs that are offered by IPPs. So at the end of the day, the tariffs that IPPs charge is not of their own designs. They are actually approved by the competent authority, in this particular case, the regulator. So I think from a bank perspective, as long as tariffs in a country are cost reflective, we believe that IPPs will have a place within the system, and they will not result in high tariffs. Thank you.
Quite some spot-on thoughts there coming from Dr. Kariuki. Crossing over to Phyllis. And Phyllis, for the last decade, we've seen a lot of efforts in Kenya to try and decentralize industries and energy consumption away from the main hubs, that is Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and the likes. Never mind in the last financial year, of course, we had the capital allowances being taken back in light of the situation we are facing presently. Just curious to know, how is the landscape looking like as far as this decentralization of manufacturing is concerned? And what are you doing as an association around the devolved structures of government that we now have?
Thank you very much. With the onset of devolution and the focus on growing all the counties around the country, we have seen a lot of opportunities at the county level. We did some work where we developed county business agendas to identify the unique opportunities for business and specifically industry and manufacturing in all the 47 counties. And as an association, we have regional offices around the country. Because of the county governments, there's need for us to grow industries in a number of counties. If you look at it, primarily industries were centered in certain counties, but the opportunities across all counties that can really lead to industrial growth. What is required, however, is first of all the issue of ensuring that there's affordable power around the country, addressing also taxation at county level, so that we are able to attract investment into counties, addressing issue of movement of goods around the country, which is also critical. I like what Ketrako Fernandez spoke about, the transmission lines that they're trying to build to evacuate power to the western part of the country, because we have offices on that side, and the power reliability and quality has been a challenge. So if we're able to address that quality around the country, we will be able to see a lot of industries mushrooming, taking advantage of the local resources and opportunities, adding value at local level, and driving up consumption. And in addition to that, we'll have improved livelihoods because of job creation, and that in its own can spur even further consumption at household level, and the growth of SMEs and industries around the country. So devolution is key in driving up the consumption of power and ensuring, as Dr. Kariuki said, that we have a cost-reflective tariff. And that's something we do support, because at the end of the day, you want sustainable utilities. We view the power game with a long range. We don't want today to have a situation where we have tariffs that are not cost reflective, and in the long run, we do not then have a utility, or we have power that is not sustainable. But on the other hand, we have to seriously look at our operational costs and how those can be minimized as much as possible also. Thanks.
Great, Phyllis. And Fernandez, in a session where I was speaking with a couple of stakeholders in the energy sector, one of the issues which emerged was the determination of a framework for wheeling charges, which of course plays right at the center of your space. Just give us an insight into what this is, why it's critical, and how far we've gone with this.
Now, with regard to wheeling charge, that's what you want to find out, eh?
Correct.
Now, when you look at the wheeling tariff at the moment, it is based on the annual revenue requirements, which is at 2% of the asset base. Now, the reason why that tariff has been approved that way is because some of the transmission lines that have been constructed are not necessarily meant for metering, that is evacuation. We have 4 types of transmission lines. We have lines which are meant basically to strengthen the national grid. For example, Mombasa, Nairobi is just strengthening the national grid. We have 132 kV lines which are basically meant to facilitate rural access of power. For example, the lines we did from Kitale, Eldoret, Kisii, Awendo, they're not evacuating power, so you may not have the metering units per se, but you have put in some investments. We have now lines that are meant to evacuate power, where metering may be useful. For example, Aluangalani Suswa line, which we completed 3 years ago, evacuating power from Loengalani up to Suswa. We also have the current transmission line that we are doing, that is Olkara, Lesos, Kisumu. This is meant, number one, to evacuate power from Olkaria all the way to Western region up to Kakamega. We're also having transmission lines that are meant to facilitate regional power trade. For example, Ethiopia-Kenya line, which is called the Eastern Electricity Highway Project. 620 kilometers, basically meant to facilitate regional power trade. We also have the Kenya-Tanzania, again an interconnector, meant to facilitate regional power trade. So when you look at all these investments, the most effective tariff framework is one that is meant to facilitate operational and maintenance costs. What we are doing at the moment, because all the loans that we get are on-granted to KETRACO, we are not actually doing the loan repayments as a company, since you're 100% government-owned. So the tariff structure is just meant to facilitate operational costs, which is paid on the annual revenue requirements and not on the units that have been weighted.
All right, great point there. And coming over to Dr. Kariuki, I remember in March this year, there was a conversation around the facility for energy inclusion. And of course, AFDB with a couple of other partners committed, at least in the short term, to about $160 million of financing for some small scale energy projects. Just give us a background around this and why this is critical in this sustainable energy conversation.
Okay, first of all, I think the thrust of the bank's interest in what we call climate investments emanates from commitments that we made in 2016. And this commitment was that at least 40% of the bank's investments by 2020 would be what you call climate investments. So, and if you may want to know where we are as far as that is concerned, starting with about $1 billion in 2016, we increased that to about $3.6 billion in 2019, which constituted about 35% of the bank's investments last year, which means that we were on track to get the 40% we had promised by 2020, but for COVID, which meant that we had to reallocate priorities. Having said that, then in order to be able to enhance investments in renewable energies, there are various instruments that we have created. One of which is what you call SEFA, the Sustainable Energy for Africa, and also the one that you've mentioned, the FEI. Which is the $160 million investment. All these investments are supposed to support investments by various entities, be it private sector or public sector, into renewable energies. So I think, and at the end of the day, we have also committed as a bank to mobilize up to $25 billion towards climate investment. So it's an ongoing process. So far, we are hoping that we'll achieve the targeted 40% by next year. But overall, I think all these funds that we are bringing on board is purely to promote renewable energies in our regional member countries, including Kenya. And I must say that as far as Kenya is concerned, I know they are beneficiary of what you call the FA fund. I think Kenya needs to be commended for the significant renewable energy contribution into the country's generation mix, which I believe is upwards of 71%, or which is really, really commendable. It's not many countries that have that level of renewable energy, and I do believe that Kenya is actually on track to creating what we call the green baseload, which is huge. And the various instruments that the FEI is one of the entities, investments that we have made with a view to promoting investments in renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hari. Coming to Phyllis, and Phyllis, we have about 3 minutes to take a break, but there's a gentleman on Twitter who is asking why can't Phyllis speak to the challenges we face in terms of unstable power supply. We're not so much concerned about the cost, it's rather the stability of it. Phyllis, I know you've spoken to this, but for their comfort, just reiterate your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Julian, I think you heard me speak about the fact that it's cost, quality, reliability, and there have been challenges about unstable power. And for industries, that basically means that when you have unstable power and you're producing products, you drop your production, you have to stop what you're doing, go back and restart your production process. And this leads to significant losses at farm level. So the reliability and quality of power is just as critical as the cost of power is within the manufacturing sector. We are currently undertaking a study as the association with KIPRA to understand the issues around quality of power. And that study will be able to demonstrate the challenges that we have been having around quality and reliability of power, so that we make the necessary changes in terms of having the transmission lines and quality powers to industry. So I agree with the person on Twitter that that's an area that's quite critical for industry. And we are looking forward to the findings of the study between CAM and KIPRA that has been funded by Danida, and we will be sharing the outcome around the quality and reliability of power in Kenya. Thanks.
Right, and that point by Phyllis Wakiaga takes us to a break. Remember, you can send us your feedback by tweeting at NTV Kenya at AmbokoJH. Tonight, we are focusing on sustainable energy. Keep it coming, because we shall be highlighting some of these issues and raising your questions to enable the panelists to address some of the issues you are raising. Don't touch the dial. We'll be back with a lot more on this discussion. Welcome back to the Nation Leadership Forum. Tonight we are focusing on sustainable energy in the country in light of some of the developments, including the National Energy Policy of 2018 and how industry is faring, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Time to take your views online. And Fernandez, if I could start with you, there are lots of questions, but let me just narrow them into one. There's a gentleman here at Olelo asking, when is the Nyakach compensation happening? Fernandez, take it away.
Thank you very much. I want to confirm that the caller could be talking about Sondu Homa Bay Nthiwa transmission line. I think what we need to just ask the caller, he can get in touch with KETRACO, because we have three types of compensation. We have compensation for structures. We have compensation for any crops that could be destroyed in the result of construction. Then we have land compensation. So one thing that I can just ask whoever has tweeted, you can share with us your details of, if it's land compensation, for example, give us all your details for land. If it's about structures, then we'll definitely get in touch with you. So far, we are doing compensations. We have done almost 70% of the compensations, and it's a continuous process as and when we get all the documentation required for land. And even for structures, we also get all the required documentation. And then that will be sorted. Thank you.
Great. And crossing over to Dr. Kariuki, there's a question here with the viewer saying that AFDB seems to be dealing with the big players only. What is it doing for the ordinary citizen? Of course, we do appreciate that AFDB lends for onward lending, so not directly. But please just clarify this for the sake of the viewer.
Thanks very much, Julians. It is actually not true that the bank is only involved in large projects. On the contrary, we do recognize that the small, what you call small consumers, especially the consumers, or rather the people in rural areas who want to go the renewable energy route, we are financing various programs that eventually finance on SME basis what you call solar home systems. So it's not true that we actually focus on the large scale projects. We do actually finance a lot of entities which are financing on SME basis the solar home systems and even the solar mini grids in rural areas. Because what we do appreciate is that at the end of the day, we understand that due to the geographical spread of our countries, there are certain areas that will not be able to access electricity soon enough. And therefore, we do acknowledge that in order to be able to holistically provide energy or electricity to these people, there's need for intervention at smaller scale. And therefore, since we can't go directly to the, those developers of solar home systems or providers of the solar home system or microgrids, what we do is that we provide facilities through various intermediaries who on land to developers of solar home systems and so also the solar mini grid. Because what we do, in so doing, what we do appreciate is that if we have to pursue or aggressively go towards achieving the sustainable energy sustainable development goals, especially with respect to energy access, we do accept that or acknowledge that we need to intervene at the smaller smaller scale levels. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and Phyllis, a similar question coming to your way: is there a place for SMEs within the Association of Manufacturers? Phyllis.
Thank you very much for that question. Within the Association of Manufacturers, we have a SME hub. The SME hub is put in place to support manufacturing SMEs. Within the hub, we offer services for business development for SMEs. We run a business growth program, for example, that assists SMEs to scale up their production. We are seeking to incubate, accelerate, and scale SMEs in the country. One of the things we are trying to do also is to create linkages between the larger manufacturers and the smaller SME players. So looking for subcontracting opportunities, market linkages so that they are able to supply to the bigger players. We also do a lot of learning tours within the larger factories. Another thing we've put in place is a mentorship program where we have members of the association who are experts in different areas volunteering as mentors for smaller businesses, and we take them through a training and link them to the relevant businesses, and they're able to put together a board of advisories for SMEs within the sector. So there's a lot happening within the SME space. There's something Dr. Kariuki spoke about I wanted to respond to, the need for sustainable and affordable energy for all. It's necessary that as we have this conversation on energy, we are looking at it at an industry level, but also at a household level. Because if you look at certain situations in the rural areas, things like cooking and lighting, people are still having to look at traditional methods to do this, which is very unfortunate. So this conversation should really be about sustainable energy for all, and also looking at how we can come up with innovations. And within the association, we have a number of members working on clean cooking systems and products that will make the lives of those in the rural parts of the country much better. We have people manufacturing solar panels and others locally. And what this will do, it will unlock economic development, because instead of people spending time going around looking for firewood or looking for sources of lighting or cooking, they'll be able to engage in more productive economic activities. So we're really keen to continue to work with the local communities to see how we can address these issues and ensure that there's sustainable energy for all within the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phyllis. And coming back to Fernandez, another question for you. Stephen Wesonga says, I'm connected to electricity, but right now I'm also in darkness, mostly at night due to blackouts that cannot be explained. What is wrong with transmission to Kakamega and Navaholo? Clearly, there might be an issue of demarcation of roles between Kenya Power and Ketraco, but please just respond to this.
One thing I want to confirm is we have one substation in Kakamega at Musaga. This is a 132 kV substation, an old substation by Kenya Power, which is serving almost 4 counties, that is Kakamega, Bungoma, Busia, and some part of Siaya. Now, for the moment, what Ketraco has done is at least to also have an alternative substation and transmission line between Mumias and Rangala, which addresses the load that is increased because of too many connections. But in Navaholo specifically, I know it's an issue around Kenya Power, which we are going to address with my colleagues. But the long-term solution for Kakamega, as I said earlier, is expansion of the Musaga substation from 132 kV to 220 kV when we start construction of the Kisumu, Kakamega, Musaga line. This will address all the challenges of stability and quality of power. Thank you.
Right, and coming back to Dr. Kariuki, you spoke about the SDGs, and of course there's the issue of being raised that whereas electrification at the national level might look like it's pretty good because of the effect of the likes of Nairobi and Mombasa, the rural areas are still quite lagging far behind. What is AFDB doing around this space of rural electrification, Dr. Kariuki?
Thank you very much, Julian. As far as for us, as I mentioned, and here we are probably more ambitious than even the sustainable energy goals, because in 2016, our target was to achieve universal access to energy to the populations on a 100% basis, but that is not likely to happen. However, what we are doing is to provide resources to countries. For example, in Kenya, we had what the so-called last mile connection project, which cost, which resulted in about 200 or 200,000 new connections in the country. So what we are doing is that we work with the countries, we complement the countries' efforts in electrification, and provide resources through various forms of policy interventions to provide funding for those last mile connections, so that we are able to, the countries are able to extend the grids, both within urban, peri-urban, and even in rural areas.
Right, and coming over to Phyllis, there's a question here, if I could just rephrase it, it suggests that what is the association doing around creating market linkages for SMEs which are in this energy space you spoke about, whether they're dealing with briquettes or whatever it is, providing the market linkages, because it sounds like there's a viewer who's dealing in this, but getting the market has been a bit of a challenge.
Thank you very much for that question. What we do is every year we have a Clean Energy Expo. And within the Clean Energy Expo, we've been able to showcase a lot of these new technologies from SMEs and innovators. We have done this alongside the Energy Management Awards. This year, unfortunately, a week to the event, COVID-19 happened. So we've not been able to do it physically, but we are going to do a virtual event. So I'll request the writer to kindly get in touch with Kenya Association of Manufacturers, info@kam.co.ke or ceo@kam.co.ke, and we'll be able to link him up and also get him involved in the activities we have around this space.
Fernandez, there's a question regarding the execution of your projects in light of COVID-19. Has there been any slowdown in light of the same? I think you spoke to this at the beginning of the show, but just recap some of the challenges perhaps you've faced in executing your transmission projects in light of the present pandemic.
Yeah, there are quite a number of challenges which we have experienced during this COVID period. The first one, of course, is delayed project completion. As I said earlier, we had to issue a force majeure event, which basically was 90 days because we could not continue with construction works during the COVID period. One of the reasons was basically to address safety of our staff. So we had to suspend works for quite a number of projects from the month of April up to end of July. Right now, of course, most of the contractors are now resuming, but observing the safety requirements. The other issue that we expect is extension of time, which we may definitely have some inherent cost because of extension of time. So ideally, there will be project delays because of the time extension. But some of the projects we are trying to do is to accelerate the construction. Of course, we have issues around, we have had to spend some bit of money on personal protective equipment, because that is now one of the ways of managing the situation. But generally, I can say that this COVID-19 has brought both opportunities and challenges. One of the opportunities I can just highlight is technology. We've now had to use a lot of virtual communication. We've been conducting meetings, board meetings virtually. This is the way to go, because I can quickly say that this COVID has actually enabled KETRACO and some of our counterparts to go paperless. For the first time, we've had a very successful e-procurement and e-disposal method of our vehicles. where we have very minimal human intervention. And going forward, I think this is the way to go because we are now going a lot of e-procurement. We are doing a lot of virtual meetings. And this is basically one way of improving operational efficiency. So besides the challenges on project delays and inherent costs associated with time extension, we also have opportunities which I believe companies are now embracing as the way of doing business, the new normal. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, as we get to the tail end of our conversation, I just want to take our closing remarks as far as this subject is concerned. And of course, picking up from that note that Fernandez has raised, there are both opportunities and challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. Phyllis, if I could start with you, what are your thoughts in terms of your outlook and how the country is likely to unfold in light of the subject of sustainable energy?
Thank you very much. As we come to the end of the conversation, I think Africa in general and Kenya in particular as a country has the ability to choose the path that we are going to follow, whether it's a path that is going to be a high carbon path or one that is around cleaner energy. So as an association, we are committed to be on the second path to ensure that there is cleaner energy. We've been doing a lot of work in this space and we are currently carrying out an impact assessment study. The initial results coming out of the first 51 companies we've reviewed is that we are able to have an emission reduction of about 15,800 tons of carbon dioxide a year. So you can imagine if we are able to move into renewable and affordable energy and energy efficiency within the manufacturing sector, the difference it would make. And as we have this conversation, we'll be launching the Center for Green Growth and Climate Change so that we expand the work we've been doing within the sector. And we are also keen to continue to work with SMEs to carry everyone along within this journey and ensure that the country has sustainable energy for all and an improved quality of life for all Kenyans so that we create jobs and become a competitive country and a manufacturing hub in Africa. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kariuki, to come to you, and even as you give us your closing remarks, just a question to you. Last year, we saw that Kenya, the Capital Markets Authority and the NSE launched the green bonds, which, of course, companies can go and raise capital, debt financing for that matter, to be able to finance sound investments by way of energy. What do you think about this as a way of financing this particular energy space?
Thank you very much, Julian. As far as green bonds are concerned, this is a very novel way for raising finance. And the way I would look at it is diversifying the sources of financing for renewable energy. So, and this being local, it means that there are a lot of other ethical investors who will only invest in renewable energy, who will come into the sector and participate. So in my view, that particular introduction of green bonds in Kenya, it will go a long way in supporting the trajectory towards a greener economy and more renewable energy projects. So I think I would put that initiative amongst the other initiatives, including the banks, other initiatives on promoting for or advancing financing for renewable energies, because I think it is key. It is key because it is local and it is a local initiative that complements well with other international initiatives on diversifying the sources of renewable energy. Coming to the post-COVID era, first of all, I'm sure a lot of us or some of us may be aware of the role that the bank has played in intervening and mitigating the impact of COVID-related impact throughout Africa through the $10 billion that what is called the COVID relief facility that the bank introduced. But we are not stopping there. COVID will come to an end and we will have a new life. So our narrative now, what we want to emphasize is to find ways of working with governments, including the government of Kenya, so that we are able to build back better and preferably greener. Thank you.
Many thanks. And crossing over to Fernandez, what are your parting shots as far as this subject is concerned, Fernandez?
Now, first and foremost, I want to just emphasize on the fact that this is quite unprecedented. This COVID-19 is quite an unprecedented crisis. and necessity is the mother of all innovations. Leaders are now called upon to be innovative, of course, to be agile more than before. And this is what is important, because when you look at what is happening at the moment, we are also required to be making decisions, which are fast decisions, in order to mitigate against the COVID. In terms of power stability, I want to confirm to Kenyans that KETRACO is committed in providing a stable, reliable, and sufficient power, which is very critical for the transformation agenda for the country. So support KETRACO. Those who have land issues, you can contact us. Support us in terms of well leave acquisition, and you are going to deliver power that is reliable to you. For the next 2 years, we are having almost 8,000 kilometers of transmission lines, which are going to be facilitated by cooperation from all the landowners and stakeholders. Thank you.
And that point by Fernandez Baraza takes us to the close of our conversation on sustainable energy on this edition of the Nation Leadership Forum. Many thanks to the viewers for giving us your feedback. Of course, it has been very critical in shaping our conversation in terms of what the outlook is like. And there's something just very briefly, Phyllis, people are asking here in terms of what is the next agenda for the business environment post-COVID? Just a quick response, Phyllis.
Thank you very much. I think COVID has come with a lot of lessons and learnings for all countries globally. And one of the things that has become clear and evident is that there is need to grow our local manufacturing industries globally. So what is next for us is for us to see how we can continue to produce a lot of products locally. And that's why the competitiveness conversation and agenda is key. The CIP by UNIDO was released about last month in July. And we saw the competitiveness of Kenya move from 112 to 115. So we are in conversation with UNIDO to work together with them and government to address these competitiveness issues so that we are able to see a lot of production happening locally, so that we are servicing not just the Kenyan market, but the regional market. You've seen, for example, around the PPEs, how the local manufacturing sector was able to respond. If you look at even the hygiene products, food products, we've not run out of any products. So it means as much as possible, with the support of government and the partnership that they have given during this COVID period, if we continue to work together, there's an ability to create jobs within the country. We're also looking a lot around youth employment and really grappling with the issue of skills development and how we can create a lot more opportunities for the youth within the manufacturing sector. And that's an area that we are currently working on as we move forward into the post-COVID. So jobs, a lot of more local production within the sector, Industry 4.0, looking at how we can move into new technology, a new way of doing things, the same way we leapfrogged into the virtual economy. In January, no one would have told you all of us would be having an interview on an online platform. So it's possible for us to leapfrog the manufacturing sector if we have the commitment from all the stakeholders. The other thing is also then to ensure that we address the fiscal issues in the country, we reduce wastage, so that we have a lot more resources available locally. And we address issues of corruption, which are a serious challenge to the growth of any economy or the development of any country. Thank you.
Many, many thanks, Phyllis. And now that's the close of our conversation. Thank you to FCPA Fernandez Baraza. Thank you to Dr. Kariuki of AFDB. And finally, Phyllis Wakiaga of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. And thank you to the viewer for taking your time to give us feedback and be part of this conversation. NTV News is up next. Don't go too far.